listening to the Mark Bradford podcast.
Hey, happy Valentine's Day. I love you. Well, happy Valentine's Day, everyone, and happy Valentine's Day to Sophie. I'm here with Sophie Personne.
Hi, Mark.
Hi. Thank you so much for joining me. This is a special bonus podcast that I'm doing, and obviously it has a very focused meaning. And in this case, it's about Valentine's Day and relationships and love and all that good stuff, something that you are quite versed in. So if you don't mind, if you could just tell everyone a little about yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Sophie. I was born in France, but I live in England. And basically, I help people with all sorts of relationship issues. That might be your box standard marriage problem, but that could also be single people that are struggling to meet the right person or are not attracting anybody at all. Or it might be the relationship that people have with themselves. So when they're struggling to deal with things that have happened in the past or depression, anxiety, that sort of thing. Yeah, so in a nutshell, that's what I do.
Well, that's great. And not only do you do that stuff, but you also just came out with a book. And I'm going to jump right into that with you. You came out with a book called Your Other Half. And I just love the cover. It has an elephant sitting next to, is it a...
It's like a dog thing.
It's like a dog. It's like a
dog. One of the better terms.
Yeah, but the size difference is really very striking. It's a very cute cover. So, tell me a bit about what Your Other Half is about.
Well, funny enough, talking of the cover, there's actually a lot of subliminal messages in it. If I'm honest, first of all, so you've got a big elephant and a small furry animal of some description. And I think it really represents that in any relationship, there's always someone that's going to be slightly more dominant. But in the relationship that we have with ourselves, there's also a dominant part. And sometimes it's the part that we actually don't want to see, or the part that we're trying to hide to everybody else, or even sometimes to ourselves. And on that cover, they kind of both sat out, looking out to sea, which the sea is very me anywhere, like water. But if you look into the sky, you can see that the cloud is starting to break, and you've got a few birds flying away. And I wanted that to kind of represent hope, that once you actually, address the problem and face it up, there is clarity coming your way, and there are better things coming your way. That's just the cover, but in essence, the book is kind of about that. Your other half is not just, the obvious, your partner or the partner that you'd like to have. It's the other half of you, as I've just explained, maybe the dominant part, or the weaker part, the part that we don't always want people to see.
Very well said. That's something that I personally believe, and I actually quoted mythology in that it was said that the humans rose up against Zeus, and Zeus struck them in half, and that we're forever looking for our other half. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I think, like you're saying, an awareness of having of there being not only another half in a relationship, but the other half personally, I think is really powerful. So that's
thank you.
Bravo,
it's actually quite an interesting one, because some of the people who have not read it will say to me, "Oh, but I'm a whole person. I don't need to find another half." And I know you haven't read it, so you don't know what I mean. Don't take it as
right.
And actually, it is that people just have a perception and they roll with it. They don't try always to dig into a bit further, shall we say?
Yes, people have a set bias in their mind of how their belief system, and they look for things that support that, and they tend to sometimes ignore things that don't, which puts them in a bubble. And social media makes that 1,000 times worse when they surround themselves with people who all have that same belief system, and they push out anything that might be slightly challenging. But I think the slightly challenging is the really cool human experiences, because information is not going to hurt you. So reading a book like this, or listening to a podcast like this, or having a webinar with someone like you can't hurt. I mean, it can only.
I know, I completely agree with you. However, some people seem to them, picking up that one book or listening to that one podcast mean that they've accepted they've got a problem. And a lot of the time they don't want to accept they've got a problem, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that's a good point too, I guess, psychologically.
They've got to reach that point first.
Yeah, I think that's a barrier people have not only in relationships, but also in success. When they want to succeed and think, well,
Oh
I don't
yeah.
need to read about that success, but I'm doing fine. It's only X. And if X was better, I'd be better. Instead of going, well, you know what? I haven't tried this. Maybe this will work. And obviously, there's a lot of fluff and there's a lot of time wasting stuff out there. There's a lot of self-help books that could have been a bullet list or could have even been a post-it note with a note on it because there's so little tangible information in there. And so I can
And to
understand.
be fair, I mean, you must find out, because obviously you've written books yourself, but I find sometimes there seems to be this fashion at the moment of writing a book for the sake of writing a book.
Yeah.
And I think that, you need to really check that the person who's written whatever book it is, actually, it's proper content, as you've just said, not like the content of a post-it note over a number of pages.
Mm-hmm. Right. I agree. And I really, I appreciate the suffering equals experience and experience equals wisdom. So when someone's suffered and they want to help me to not suffer, I appreciate that. And I think, it's that way with kids where you can tell them so many things to not do or to do, but they're not going to listen because they have to shove through it themselves. And I think sometimes people have to suffer themselves, but if you can stop from suffering and figure something out, I think it's really helpful to have a book.
Yeah, no, definitely.
With like you said, with the proper context and the proper content. So, but I think you've made the point in the past also in our chats that sometimes it's good to look at the perspective and the setup is important. I think you corrected me on that, and I appreciated that. And that where I was looking for bullets, and you say, well, sometimes people have to set up the situation and kind of explain to you how they got there. So that adds a little bit more to the book. So I appreciate that now.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think I was introduced to a concept not so long ago called going back to the suffering and, learning from experiences and stuff. And it was called feather, brick, truck. And basically, sometimes, I know, but wait for it. When you get tickled by a feather, and you've got a little problem, but you kind of dismiss it and you don't learn the lesson from it, you then all of a sudden get hit by a brick because it's something that you really do need to address. But you kind of dismiss it again because you don't want to deal with it. You don't want the hurt. You don't want the suffering that goes with going there. And then all of a sudden you get run over by a truck because, this time the attention is required and you need to deal with it. And I think people forget that. Sometimes, a little something that's annoying and a tickle actually does need to be looked at, because it's a bit like when a light comes on in your car, it does indicate there's something that you need to address. Right. And it's the same in life.
Oh, totally. I think, I think that's a really important thing. That's interesting. And I wrote that down. Medical stuff is like that too. Sometimes people have a little pain. Yeah. And they're like, well, and you go to the doctor and he says, well, how long is this going on? Oh, I don't know, a year and a half. Well, why didn't you say anything? I didn't think it was important. And sometimes, you can't be a hypochondriac, but at the same time, you also sometimes have to address things. So I think in your life too, when you feel like this irritation or the feather, like you said, yeah, maybe kind of like stop what you're doing and stop being in the rat race, and take a breath and go, okay, why is this happening? And what is that exactly? And I bet you deal with that all the time in relationships, and when people have that little feather in their relationship and it turns into a truck very quickly.
Yeah, and I think the thing as well is a lot of the time it's because people don't trust themselves and they don't trust their gut instinct either. They kind of know there's an issue, but they're not addressing it because it's always that fear that addressing it is going to make it worse, and actually a lot of the time it's hiding away from it that makes it worse. And especially if you're in a relationship and you kind of know something's not quite right and you're not sure how to address it, but people then think, oh no, it's my problem, I must be getting that wrong, and a lot of the time it isn't. There are genuine signs that you need to speak to your partner or whatever. And it's the same when you're single and you attract a certain type of person. Why are you attracting that kind of person? Why is it in you that you're giving that perception that only attracts that kind? I mean, for me, for instance, when I was much younger, I used to attract really, really older men and needy older men as well. And I couldn't quite work out why. I mean, I know now it's because I probably... I'd kind of that strong woman type of thing that they liked, and actually I never showed the weak side. which, when I realised that, started to show, and all of a sudden I don't attract the old men that are needy anymore. But do you know what I mean? Sometimes you've got to really look at yourself and why is it that this is happening to me? Why is it that this keeps on happening to me? What am I doing that is making that happen?
You have mentioned that in the past about you know, and you use the phrase sometimes, what's holding you back, right? And isn't that a webinar that you have, or you have something like that, a seminar about what's holding you back?
Yeah, I have a few webinars coming up in the next couple of weeks. I'm actually still working. I've got the presentation kind of sorted, but I'm still working on the titles. There's going to be one which is actually for single people, and they're struggling to attract the right person for them and may have been trying for a number of months or years. One is going to be around better relationships all round, because, you know, let's be realistic, we have relationships with everyone, from the neighbours to who we work with to obviously, you know, our spouses or family or whatever. And the last one is going to be around change and how and why we sometimes struggle to break certain habits. So it's all kind of linked, but it's all kind of different, if you know what I mean.
Totally. I think a lot of that is very interconnected, and I think that's all really fascinating. And obviously, you know, that's what spurred me on to write the Status Game too. Is like this relationship, the interconnectivity and the machinery of relationships is really fascinating, especially when your eyes are opened as yours are, so that you can explain it to other people.
Yeah, and I think this is a part of the issue. A lot of the time, people need to understand themselves first. Once they understand why they make the decisions that they make, why they tick the way that they do, then they can start to understand why other people are the way they are. And from that, they can then learn better communication. But it all starts with us. Until we master the relationship that we have with ourselves, it'd be very difficult to master any kind of other relationship.
Right. Like you said, with your other half being, there's a half of you first before there's a half of your relationship.
Yeah.
That's very cool stuff. Do you have another book in the works, or are you kind of in that taking a breath after writing a book mode?
No, there's another 3 to come. One is going to be on grief, but that I need to finish the cycle myself so that I can then, you know, pass on the idea, shall we say, and the processes that I hope. One is going to be around anxiety, because one of the things I'm seeing a lot with my clients is that anxiety, especially in England, seems to be quite a massive issue at the moment. But actually, it's not always. It's sometimes called anxiety, but actually it's something else. So I want to write about that. But the next one is going to be around freeing yourself from toxic situations. So that could be a toxic job, a toxic relationship, a toxic place in your own head. You know, all that sort of stuff that, again, goes with self-talk and understanding ourselves.
Oh, well, that's very cool. I absolutely love it when a series sort of feeds on itself and that you kind of build a foundation and you go from there. That's something I tried really hard with the nonfiction that I've written, that each one builds upon the other one. And this absolutely sounds like if someone gets your other half, then they would happily move on to the other ones too, because I'm sure the same voice is used in all those. And anxiety is a big deal these days.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it used to be called stress, I think, about 10 years ago, but it is really the same thing, isn't it? But actually, it's moving on, because in the last sort of couple of months, the one thing I'm hearing more and more than anxiety is, oh, I've got low self-worth, low self-esteem. And I actually generally believe that it's probably coming from social media in some way or another, because we keep on unconsciously comparing ourselves to everybody else. And whether you're doing well or not well, you know, your perception of what you're doing might be completely different to the perception of someone else. But because of that constant feeding, you know, look at me, I'm the expert, look at me. And, you know, someone who's got like 10 million followers on YouTube and they're like 14, and you're like, why isn't that me? You know, why can't I? My message is just so important as well. And do you know what I mean? So we constantly battered that we're not as good as the next person. And I think that's what triggers a lot of that anxiety and low self-esteem and all of that, to be honest.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I totally believe that. In the context of what I wrote, I was saying that the little dashboard that you look down on to see where your dials are, you plug it into the wrong one, and then you get low self-esteem because you're using someone else's dials for yourself, and it doesn't work that way. And that's where the whole judging thing comes from, and that we all judge. I mean, where do we put the lamp? How much sugar do you want in your coffee? That's all judging. I mean, everything's judging. If you didn't judge someone, they didn't need to show up for work and they'd still be paid. Obviously, there's judging in life, but the judging and the judgmental thing that we call judgmental is really us judging based on the wrong parameters. And that's when we judge our height or our weight based on someone else. We're just our own people, and we have to, each person gets their own sort of parameters. And if you don't, then you get an awful lot of self-esteem issues, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's quite sad, really, that everybody is kind of striving for more all the time as opposed to be content with what they've got.
Mm-hmm. Oh my God, yes. And that's why you hear the word gratitude come up so much.
But at the same time, you see, I can understand how, because sometimes the common saying kind of here is like, oh, first world problems, kind of meaning that it's not so important, is it? But at the same time, we do live in the first world. So it does become quite important, if you know what I mean.
It doesn't it sound like there's an awful lot of conflict? I mean, that there's an awful lot of it's kind of a paradox, isn't it? That, you know, we should have gratitude, but by the same token, we shouldn't put up with things. So wait, and I think as a civilization, as people who are slowly and continually improving in so many ways, right? I mean, there are things that you could say are first world problems, but well, good for you. I mean, we should continue to hone our existence to the point where these things that used to be tiny problems are slightly larger, that we can address them because we have the luxury to not have to worry about where clean water is coming from and other things, so that we can kind of focus on that stuff. But by the same token, the paradox is that, yes, you shouldn't be whining on social media for 2 days because you paid 4 cents more for your coffee or someone didn't smile at you in the elevator. You know, there's still a difference there.
Yeah, and I think it is people's expectations are starting to be a bit sometimes warped. I mean, I heard something, I hope I heard this wrong, on the news earlier on, which was that they're going to look at school time being maybe like later than what it is. And I was thinking, what do you mean it's going to be later than what it is? What, because kids start finding it difficult to get up? But what are they going to do when they've got to work? You know, but the day's not going to start any later just because we're finding it hard to get up. You've got to learn at some point that, you know, we don't always do what we want to do.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting you say that, because in the district that my kids grew up in, where I live, we had the earliest start times for anyone. And so they would stand at the bus stop while it was dark outside. And because of that, that's where I ended up getting up at 5:30 every day because of that. And even after the kids graduated, I still get up at 5:30 because it was so ingrained in me to make sure I was up with them. And you're right. We do need to, I guess it's almost like cheating if you focus on the harder way to do something and try that first, because then you know how easy it is the other way. So like you said with school, if kids have to get to school early, then when they get into the workforce, they go, well, yeah, I'm used to this.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, I recall before doing what I'm doing, so when I left my managerial job, I retrained, and it was around assessing the performance of people and, you know, kind of mentoring / coaching. And some of the people that would attend these sessions were early 20s, and they did not really understand that, you know, basically the setup was like 4 days they were going to work, and then 1 day they were coming with us to explain how, you know, it was going at work, what they needed to learn or do more or less of or whatever. But it seemed to them that these sessions meant they'd turn up when they wanted, and it wasn't like that at all. There was a start time and there was an end time, and that was about 7-8 years ago now. But I just find that quite frightening, you know. I know that we don't always do what we want to do, but that's called responsibilities, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. And I think they're the trappings of adulthood. in which you move through adulthood and you get certain things. You get a car, house, all that other stuff, and all like getting married and all that other good stuff. As you slowly move through those trappings, you realize you're kind of gaining levels, and you think, oh, okay, that thing that was so incredibly difficult isn't so difficult anymore, because now I'm getting the whole life thing. I'm getting the whole adulting thing, and it's easy before you've done any of these things to start thinking that it's difficult or it's complicated. But once you sort of move through them, because you just have to, I think your perspective changes.
I think this is the thing through
really
life. We there are difficult times and there are good times, and I think that pretending that it's always a good time is not helpful, because unfortunately it's a bit like a wheel, isn't it? The law of physics says that a wheel is going to go down and then it's going to go back up and then it's going to go down again. It's just the way it works. It doesn't stay still. And it's the same for life. You're going to have peaks and then it's not going to be so good, and then it's going to go back up, and again. It's just one of those things. And I think that, the sooner you accept it, then the easier it is, as you just said. And maybe that is why there's so much anxiety and low self-esteem, is because we're trying to protect the kids so much so that they don't struggle, that actually when they are faced with a little bit of conflict or struggle, they don't know how to handle it anymore.
Right. A perfect example is when parents are coaching their kids in sporting events, and when you see just how crazy that gets, I've seen it firsthand, and it's amazing. And
I've not had the pleasure, but I've heard.
yeah, I'm glad you've been spared that pleasure. So my kids weren't really involved in sports, but I had gone to other people's sporting events, and just to see that interaction where the kids are actually learning, and they're just, things are happening to them in sports that are supposed to happen. They fall down and people were just irate. So you're right about that people do tend to be a little bit helicoptery and sort of prevent people from doing that. But as a parent too, I think, well, I'm a big hypocrite, because I would do anything I could to stop my kids from suffering to a point, so
of course
we're back to the paradox again. But if we go back to
feather brick truck,
yes.
Sometimes we can't prevent, we might stop the brick on the child or whatever, but then it means that they don't get to experience what the brick was, and then they get the truck, so it's even worse for them, if you know what I mean.
Right. So allowing them to maybe just get the brick so that they don't ever get the truck. But
pretty much. It's a bit like, when you've got your 2-year-old and you say, don't put your hand in the candle because you're going to burn yourself. There's nothing that you can do to stop them from putting their hand in the candle or cutting themselves on a knife. But they kind of need to learn that, because otherwise, how are they going to know what cuts and what burns?
Mm-hmm. Oh, and that's learned very quickly. You only do it once, don't you? Right. So before I let you go, I want to make sure that we hit all the bases on the stuff that you have going on. And we talked about your book. You have a blog. People can visit you at your page, and I have this all in the article that comes along with this. So is there anything else you wanted to just remind people of before I let you go? Yeah,
no, just the book is available on Amazon. .com and .co.uk or wherever you're from, and all the webinars will be advertised on my website and on the normal social media pages, so Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, that sort of stuff. Thank you.
Wonderful, and thank you so much. And what's the weather? Where exactly are you right now?
I'm on the south coast of England, and it's quite grey and white and horrible.
Oh, nice. I'm in the middle of a snowstorm. So, yeah, that's very interesting. It's nice to be able to chat with you across the ocean.
Yeah, definitely.
I appreciate
Thank you.
Taking your time out. So it's always nice to chat with you. So have a great Valentine's Day.
Thank you, and you too.
Thank you. Hey, it's me. Thanks for listening. I appreciate you coming back. Check me out on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. I'm always interested in your feedback. I really look forward to it. So let me know what you think. Thank you.